Hi again, this is Andy from Nummech Products. This is an installation video for the upgraded VL frame for both a Mini and an Axe. As you can see in front of you, here's a Mini, here's an Axe. The installation procedure is very similar between the two, so I'm going to be doing both at once. The two frames you see in front of you are exactly as they come outside of the package. The Axe version with the air transfer spring-loaded coupling in the bottom. And here's the Mini version, also with spring-loaded coupling. There's no spare hardware outside of the two ASA screws. Two screws in the front for the foregrip, and then there's also a magnet which has a screw that locks it in place. Hopefully you won't have anything fall out on the way to your house, but if it does, it's probably inside of the bag still. In order to install these two parts on the gun, you have to basically take apart the entire frame, which means taking off the grips, taking off the regulator, the foregrip, the trigger, and in the case of an Axe, you also have to deal with the quick release in the back. And in the case of a Mini, when you release the frame, you also have to deal with the firing assembly since it'll come out on its own. So there's a lot involved with this, but it's not exactly difficult. So we're going to go through it right now. The first step is you have to remove the grip panels from your gun using an Allen key. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. Mini. Okay, here's the internal side of the Mini, just like that. Same thing with the Axe. Now there's a lot of different things you can do in the disassembly. A lot of different things can happen at any order. So the order I'm following is just what I recommend you do. It's not necessarily required. The next thing I'm going to do, as you can see, is remove the foregrip. Do that just by loosening the two screws that hold it in place, and it should slide off like that. And as you can see on this particular Mini, we have some of our other Nummech accessories, namely the foregrip extender and a drop forward. So this video is going to take you through installation of all those parts, even though we already have videos for them already. Foregrip slides off just like with the Axe. Set that aside. Now, as I said, you can follow any particular order that you'd like. At this point, I choose to remove the frame itself from the gun. That way I'll be able to access the internals a little bit easier. So for an Axe, take your Allen key and remove the two screws holding it up to the body, like so. The frame will slide off like this. Be gentle to not to snag the wires, and there you go. The body you can set aside. You won't need that for a little while. Now with the Mini, you have a little bit more of an issue because the rear screw that I'm taking out right now also holds in the firing assembly. That's why I'm holding it back with my pinky finger, as you can see. So when I take the screw out, I'm now going to pop off the firing assembly, and that way you don't have it come out and smack you in the face by accident. Set that aside, and now I'm going to take out the remaining front screw. As you can see, it helps greatly to have ball-rounded Allen keys to make things a lot easier. And again, gently slide the frame off, being sure not to snag any wires. In this case, they have extra wires for an RF transmitter installed in this Mini, so you can see how that goes. Okay, so now you can see the frames are all by themselves. I forgot to mention one detail. In the top of the Axe frame, you have the little bolt quick disconnect push button, which is spring-loaded, so I'm going to take that out now just to make sure that it doesn't spring across the room on me. I'm going to set that right here. It's a good idea to do that as soon as you take it off from the body, that way you don't lose any parts. So now the next step is, in this case, I'm going to take out the triggers. To do that, all you have to do is use a small punch to push out the pin. You can see one side of the pin is knurled, and it should come out that way. If you're unable to push out the pin, you can use a small punch with or maybe a screwdriver or something, and maybe smack on it with a piece of wood. Give it a little incentive to come out. And as soon as you pop the pin out, the trigger will come free like that. Same thing with a Mini. All you have to do is push it out. Hopefully it won't be too hard to do. Trigger comes out. Okay, we're getting there. Now, the last step of disassembly is you have to remove the bottom line regulator or ASA. Same thing. To do that, loosen these two set screws, and eventually the ASA will be able to come out along with the small dovetail bracket, which you have to reuse. So I'm going to take out all these parts, set them right over here. These are all the parts that we're going to install in the new frame. The old frame, along with the bottom transfer tube, you can set this aside, keep it for later as a spare. Same deal with the mini frame. In this case, we have a drop forward that's installed, but it's more or less the same removal procedure. All you have to do is loosen these two screws, although in this case I'm going to take them all the way out because the drop forward uses a pair of little ball bearings that are inside these holes. Okay, drop forward slides off. Again, the stock frame with the stock tube, you can set that aside as you won't be needing either of those parts. Alright, the hardware that you see in front of you, the upgraded frame itself plus all these stock parts, these are what you're now going to be assembling back onto the gun. What I'm going to do first is the most difficult part to explain, which is the trigger. In the mini frame, actually here, start with the axe frame. There's a pre-installed magnet located right here, and that is meant to repel against the magnet that's inside of the frame. So when you take your trigger, put it up in position and see if it's actually being attracted or repelled by the magnet. And you can see right in here, in this case, it's actually being attracted, which means the trigger is being pulled shut. You don't want that. So, if that's the case, all you have to do is use a 1/16 Allen key to loosen the screw down here in the top, which is holding the magnet in position. All I did was loosen it, and now the magnet itself will come right out. And what you have to do is figure out which direction is going to repel the trigger and which direction is going to attract it. You just do this by holding the two together, and you can see I'm actually pushing on the trigger, repelling it, so that means that this side of the magnet has to face out. So I'm just going to flip the magnet around and put it in that direction, and now tighten the small set screw that tightens it in position like that. Now when you go to install your trigger, the magnets should be pushing on the trigger, not pulling it. The reason I wanted to go over this first is because it's just a 50-50 thing. Sometimes these magnets here in the trigger are installed one way or the other, and there's no way that I can predict it, so the magnet as it comes stock is just installed one way or the other. You might have to flip it, you might not. The frame is specifically designed to take the knurled end, which you can see coming out of my hand, push it in through the left side of the frame, this being the left, other side being the right. And once the frame accepts the new trigger pin, it should sort of knurl itself into position. There we go. So push the trigger pin all the way in like that, And now you can, like I suggested earlier, take a piece of wood and kind of smack on it, get it to go all the way in. I'm just going to push it up against the side of the table to get it to kind of go a little bit flush. And you can see, like I said earlier, now the trigger is repulsing the frame, and that is exactly what you want. You don't want the trigger to get sucked down, because then your gun is just going to be firing as soon as you turn it on. And basically that's not going to work at all. So there we go, trigger is already installed. On the mini frame, the procedure is similar, except the screw to access the magnet is located in the bottom, not the top. So again, take your trigger, one-handed, and guide that in and see if it's being attracted or repelled by the frame. In this case, this magnet is installed the correct direction, so you don't have to do any work in this situation. And again, the knurled end of the trigger pin should come in contact with the left side of the frame. So I'm going to guide it in like this, push that down in, and there you go. You can see, like I said, it is repelling it. Now the special thing with the mini frame is that you can loosen the screw holding the magnet and pull it backwards or forwards, and that gives you a little bit of an adjustability into the trigger pull weight. With the axe frame, you already have that built into the trigger. You can adjust the trigger magnet one way or the other. But with the mini frame, you now have that adjustability built into the frame itself. You don't really have to mess with that if you don't want to, but it's an option that you have. Either way, we now have the triggers both installed. So now next step, I'm going to install the tank adapters in the bottom. This is a part that you may have to do a couple times depending on how the installation goes. As you can see, I slid out the dovetail rail out from the tank adapter. The two screws that are located up in here, you want these to be basically right in the middle of the holes that are going all the way through. So I'm going to back these off just a little bit. The frame comes with a spring-loaded air coupling. You can see that it's got a spring behind it, and so it automatically takes up the slack and adjusts on its own. But you still have to get things close to the right position in order for them to go together correctly. I'm going to slide the dovetail rail back onto the regulator and just guide it up into position. Oops, hold on one second. These set screws have to be unscrewed so that it has room to go in. Okay. So with one hand, hold onto the frame. With your other hand, push on the regulator right up into position. And now I squeeze it just like this. You can tighten these two screws, and it should tighten the regulator up against the bottom of the body. You shouldn't have any wiggling. If your regulator wiggles a little bit, just take everything back off and unscrew or screw in deeper the two small screws that these are holding in. It kind of varies from gun to gun. Sometimes you have to unscrew them, sometimes you have to go deeper. You'll have to play around with it on your own. But this is probably the one thing that you may have to go back and redo once you're all finished. I'm just going to make sure these are tight. And there we go, that's all installed. On the mini frame, it's the exact same procedure. Take your drop forward in this situation, or just the regular ASA. Slide it up into position, hold it with one hand, and tighten these two screws. The spring-loaded coupling should do all the hard work for you, and everything will be nice. There you go. Okay, so with the axe frame, there's one last step. Remember that little quick release button we took out earlier? You have to take that and install it inside of the top of the new frame, just like the stock frame. Now the difference is we've machined a very small lip that the spring gets trapped under. and that keeps it from popping out. It can still pop out on this side, but the spring itself is trapped, so hopefully that'll prevent any issues during this installation. But once you get that in place, you have the trigger, you have the ASA, everything's all ready to go. So now I'm going to take the body and just guide them back together like that. Pull them up into position and reinstall the screws. Tighten the screws just hand tight so you don't have to strip anything out. Alright. Similar procedure with the mini frame. Take your marker body, and all you have to do is gently guide the frame down into the top. And in this situation I have to make sure I'm not going to snag this RF connector, but it should just go in like that. Here we go. Reinstall the 2 screws. If you remove the fairing assembly, install that right now. And while holding this together, I'm going to reinstall the final screw like this. There it is. Alright, so now we've gone into the testing phase of the gun. I reinstalled the foregrip, and what I'm going to do here in a little bit is power it up like this. Keep in mind this is not the factory circuit board, but it's close enough. So what you're going to have to do is test everything out. Try to see if the trigger is to your liking, because it's possible you'll have to perform some trigger adjustments to get everything back the way you like. In this situation, I like the way this feels, so I'm fine with it. I'm going to turn the board off, and now I'm just going to go through and make sure everything's tight. What you probably want to do at this point is install your tank and pressure test the bottom to make sure that the air fitting is forming a secure connection. If it's not, then all you have to do is take another O-ring and just drop it in the bottom. You'll basically end up with 2 little O-rings, but it's fine because they seal together. Now there's one additional step you may have to perform for an axe grip only. You can see here I have a pair of stock grips. Some of the grips have these small molded ridges that run up the length of them. That holds them better holds them with a stock frame. What you're going to have to do if you have these ridges is take a small knife like this steak knife here, cut away at one side of it. As you can see, I've just removed about 1/4 inch of this ridge here, and that's going to allow it to sit fully flush with the frame. If the grips you have don't have these ridges, then you don't have to worry about it. But if you do have them, it's probably something you have to do. I can show you the way they look. This side of the frame has the ridges still installed, and there's a little bit of a gap. On this side there's no gap, and that's because the ridges have been modified slightly. So all you have to do is take a knife and just pick away at the bottom of the ridge until it's gone. Very easy to do, and if you revert back to the stock frame, this modification here won't mean anything. And there you go, you can see both sides of those ridges have been modified slightly. Now when I go to reinstall these grips, everything will be perfectly flush and ready to go. So that's what I'm going to do right now, reinstall these grips. If I can find the right key. There we go, the last grip screw. And that's that. The axe is now totally reassembled, ready to go. Set that aside. Now on the Mini, same thing. Take your foregrip, or in this case foregrip extender, slide it up onto the frame. Looks like these screws are a little bit in the way. I gotta back them out. There we go. Slide that back onto the frame. And once again, now that these screws are all tight, you can turn the marker on and test out the trigger to see if it's to your liking. I like the way that feels just the way it is, so I'm going to turn the gun off, and that's ready to go. Take your mini grips, whichever pair you have, and reinstall. Alright, here's the last screw. This means everything should be ready to go. As I said, install with a tank, pressure test everything to make sure everything is good. You may have to make some small adjustments down here on the bottom of the regulator, but that's an easy thing to do. Hopefully that wasn't too hard. If you have any questions, just let us know. Thanks.